Paris, the City of Light, is known around the world as being the epicenter of culture, fashion and fine cuisine. But just below the surface, there's evidence of the city's dark history, in the form of the skeletal remains of 6 million people. The bones are artfully arranged down in the catacombs to pay respect to the long-departed Parisians, drawing crowds of 500,000 visitors each year. But for other dark tourists, it's the stories about the paranormal that draw them down into the Paris catacombs, trying to get a glimpse of one of the souls who may still be trapped down there. The Paris catacombs wasn't actually created with the specific intention of becoming a huge underground ossuary though, because these tunnels under the city had existed long before the bones were actually moved in. Because where Paris sits, it's actually on top of a bunch of limestone, and it was the Romans, when they had settled into the area and created the town Lutetia Parisiorum, they had started quarrying the limestone in just open-air mines to construct the town's buildings. But by 1321, the inhabitants of the now capital city of France, Paris, had started to mine the limestone by digging the underground tunnels. And this was good rock that they were digging up. It was the same limestone that was used to build the Notre Dame Cathedral and the Louvre Palace. Eventually though, by the 18th century, they had to take a long hard look at what they were doing and decided to stop mining under the city. Because when the mines were first dug, it was outside of the city limits. But obviously, cities grow and expand. And eventually the above ground expansion had caught up with the underground tunnelling, and there was now tunnels underneath the city buildings. So they kind of had no choice but to stop. The land was now too valuable to be basically Swiss cheesing even more of these foundations and risking the buildings collapsing. And also by this time, the 1700s, the city itself was becoming overcrowded. They just couldn't expand fast enough. And not just for the living, for the dead too. The cemeteries had a space problem. One of the worst affected was the Holy Innocents Cemetery. All of the cemeteries were bad, but this one was particularly nasty. And that's because there were over 2 million bodies buried in this cemetery alone, which just sounds insane to think about it. 2 million. I'm gonna have to put an image on the screen or something to just show some sort of representation of how many people that actually is. The Holy Innocents Cemetery had been in use for about 600 years, and obviously there was only a finite amount of space. The city had built up around the churchyard, there was nowhere for them to expand to, so they were having to pile bodies on top of existing burials. So you can imagine, the graves were getting shallower and shallower. You couldn't dig down too deep because you'd hit another body. Eventually it got to the point where they had to start digging mass graves because just burying one corpse in an individual hole wasn't working out anymore. And these pits contained 1,500 bodies each. When one pit was full, they'd cover it up and dig another one. But even that wasn't a solution really, was it? Still a finite amount of space. And because of how close these decaying remains were to the surface, it wasn't the nicest place to find yourself. Because the stench of rotting corpses was apparently so bad that it was said to be able to curdle milk. Which is quite a dramatic statement to make, so may have not been the full truth. But the fact is, there would have been a lot of gases like methane, hydrogen sulfide being released because of these bodies decomposing so close to the surface that would have been making the air around the cemetery so oxygen poor that the bodies weren't actually rotting away properly. The bacteria involved in eating away at the soft tissues couldn't thrive and do their job. So not only were the Paris cemeteries rather fragrant, but the corpses were just kind of turning into this fatty, gelatinous substance known as corpse wax. Rather descriptive. So unsurprisingly, this level of overcrowding of bodies stacked on top of bodies in quite highly populated areas most certainly contributed to outbreaks of disease in Paris, which, of course, meant more bodies, and nowhere but overcrowded cemeteries to put them. You see the vicious cycle going on here. Things quite literally reached a breaking point though when the cellar wall of a building that sat alongside the cemetery collapsed, and the owners of said building ended up with partially decomposed corpses spilling into their cellar. Up until this point, King Louis XVI had already been trying to get the cemeteries moved out of the city, but the church was pushing back. Because burials were a nice little earner for the church, so they didn't really want to give up their income stream. Eventually though, there was no denying that something had to be done. So on the 4th of September 1780, the cemeteries of Paris were officially closed down. No more bodies allowed to be buried here. But now, they had the next problem. The bodies that had already been buried, they couldn't just be left there. They still weren't decomposing properly. They needed to move them all, but where to? All while this is going on, there is another problem raging on. Remember how I said that they had to stop mining under the city because they were risking buildings collapsing, yeah, that's exactly what happened. Because, like I said, these mines were never dug with the intention of having buildings built on top of them. No one went back and secured them, making sure the streets above were safe. This entire network of about 186 miles underneath the city had just been abandoned, just down tools and left. But in 1774, the first in a series of cave-ins had happened. Like, parts of the city were just crumbling into the abandoned tunnels below. So on the 4th of April 1777, King Louis had commissioned an organisation called the Inspection des Carrières, literally translated to Inspection of the Mines. And they were to go and inspect the state of these tunnels and come up with a plan to maintain them so the entire city didn't just fall down. So the first guy in charge of this mine inspection team, Charles Axel Guillamot, he was the one to create the first proper map of the tunnels that had been left behind. And by this point, his job was just to make sure that the old tunnels were stable enough, and that was that. But it's likely that Charles had a hand in suggesting the absolute brainwave of moving all these bodies that were piled on top of each other in these cemeteries into the ready-made underground tunnel network below the streets. They'd already been doing the work to reinforce the tunnels that needed it, so they were stable enough, and they were just sitting there, so why not? And so that's what they did. The area of the tunnel network chosen as the new ossuary was consecrated as the Paris Municipal Ossuary on the 7th of April 1786, and that same year they started to move the bodies on wagons covered in black cloth during the night. So it obviously served a practical purpose, emptying the cemeteries, but it was still treated with dignity. There were priests who would walk with the wagons, chanting on the way there, as a kind of funeral procession. And after 2 years of these nightly processions, the remains of around 6 million people had been moved from the Paris cemeteries into the catacombs. Even the corpse wax that was left at the cemeteries, that was put to good use. It was used to make candles and soap. Don't think about it too much. You're thinking about it, don't think about it. And just as a side note on the name catacombs, it's commonly used to refer to the entire network of tunnels beneath the city. But if we're getting all technical, the catacombs, the area where all the remains are, is actually just a tiny little section. Just something to bear in mind. So initially, after 1788, it was jobs are good un, the bones were just dumped underground, very disorganised pile of bones, out of sight, out of mind. In 1810, a guy called Louis-Étienne Héricard de Thuy took over as the head honcho in charge of the mine inspection service. And it was this guy who decided to turn the catacombs into something more than what was effectively a dumping ground for bones. So he renovated the tunnels and turned them into an actual mausoleum, organising the skulls and femurs and tibias into those intricate patterns that we can see today. He also had signs and plaques put up around the catacombs. Obviously, you're never going to be able to identify who these individuals are ever again, but you can put up a sign to say which cemetery this particular collection of bones came from. How accurate it actually is, I don't really know, considering the bones were just piled up in a very disorganised way when they were initially put down there, but apparently they figured it out. They also displayed skeletal deformities that the team had come across when they were arranging these patterns, and so it was looking more like this proper place for the living to go to pay their respects to the dead. They'd also walled off the catacombs from the rest of the tunnels. It was just now this little section. And so the catacombs themselves were apparently open to the public in 1809. You could go and have a walk around, but I think it was by appointment only. And I think it's for this reason why the rest of the tunnels were largely just forgotten about, at least to the general public. Obviously the mine inspection service still did their work, and up until 1830 you could still freely just walk around down there. But why you would want to back then, I don't really know, other than maybe if you needed somewhere that was away from prying eyes, like your neighbours, or maybe even the law. There was talk that during the 18th and 19th century, occultists would go down into the tunnels to conduct rituals and seances, and that's why there have apparently been symbols, some tied to secret occult societies, and others like pentagrams and crosses found on the walls. But while the majority of people taking a trip underground were going there to pay their respects to the dead, there have been cases of others who seemingly just want to add to the number down there. As there was one story of a double murder that happened down in the catacombs in 1824. There was a guy called Alexandre Fanconade, who was described as a very handsome man who had a bit of a manners problem. Apparently wasn't a super nice guy. He was courting a very wealthy widow who had a 3-year-old daughter. And I think it must have been a little hush-hush, but people knew about it. Because technically, the widow shouldn't have been seeing anyone as she was still in her 2-year mourning period after losing her husband. But then on the night that her mourning period finished, the widow and her daughter went to see Alexandre at his work. And what does this guy do for a living? He was what you would probably now call a cataphile, which is someone who ventures down into the catacombs through the more unofficial routes. But basically, he was a torchbearer for people who wanted to go down into the catacombs. Because 1824, that was still a-okay to do. Thing was, the morning after that night, people noticed that the widow widow and her daughter were missing. Even more suspiciously, Alexandre had just so happened to choose that day to pursue a fresh start in life and left Paris. Not too long after that, the bodies of the woman and child were discovered in the catacombs. Alexandre, obviously nowhere to be found, he'd already skipped town, and so that kind of seemed to be that. Until 6 months later, 190 miles away from the city in a village called La Recuse, a police officer had asked a handsome yet aloof stranger for a light. As this stranger obliged, the officer noticed something in his pocket. It was a letter addressed to the man, which had been given to him by the widow, and it had her name on it. I don't even know how the officer could have seen that sort of detail, but there we go. Word must have been spread around the area of this murder that had happened in Paris, as the police officer recognised the names and arrested this man, who was, of course, Alexandre. He was taken back to Paris and beheaded on the 7th of March, 1825. And that was the only documented murder that I came across that was written in a newspaper. But I mean, you've got 186 miles of tunnels under the city, multiple points of entry and exit. It's a dark, winding place. It's kind of giving me Edinburgh Vaults vibes. You know, where it could very well have been that criminal haven, and there could have been more than a few murders and things happened down there that maybe just were never discovered. Maybe the bodies are left somewhere and then they've had a cave-in so they will never be discovered. Just makes you think, doesn't it? During World War II, French resistance fighters used the catacombs to hide out from Nazi invaders. And then so too did the Nazis. They even built a secret bunker down there. A little bit tense, probably. On the 2nd of November 1955, after a couple of decades of the catacombs gradually being closed off or caved in, it was declared illegal to go down into them if you weren't part of the official visitor ossuary bit. Not only is it dangerous for you to go down there yourself, but also it's dangerous in that if you damage them in just precisely the wrong way, you might also cause a cave-in that affects the street above, you know? There are still people that regularly go down into the catacombs, those people known as cataphiles. And there are technically illegal art installations, parties, raves, all sorts that still go on down there. But the official catacombs, where the remains of those 6 million Parisians are laid to rest, that has become a super popular tourist spot now. And it's not just a fun little attraction for all the family. It is a place where literally millions of real humans who had real lives and real dreams are now laid to rest. And while it is pretty remarkable to look at the sheer amount of bones and the artful way that they've been arranged, it should still be this place of respect, of contemplating your own mortality. But that doesn't mean that rumours of ghost stories haven't found their way out of the underground tunnels. There's literally a sign above the doorway to the ossuary translating to "Stop, this is the Empire of Death." And there are legends that the catacombs are home to the literal gates of hell. And there aren't many out-and-out ghost sightings down in the catacombs, but there are a couple of stories of specific entities. The first one is just known only as the Guardian. He's apparently the spirit of a former quarry worker who is fairly neutral unless you disrespect the remains, and then again, apparently this entity will turn nasty. But that is kind of all the information I could find on it. And I don't know, is it just a story made up to scare people away from touching or messing with the bones down there? I don't know. The second entity is a lady in white, and she comes as described. She is a woman with long hair in a long white flowy dress, and she seems to be almost glowing, which is obviously a bit weird in itself, but then it's said that when people try to approach her, she vanishes. Apparently, the legend is that this entity is a lady from a noble French family who lived in Paris, and at some point this woman got lost down in the catacombs and died from exposure. But again, that's kind of it. No names, no dates, which to me just pushes the story from a potential explanation into it's probably just folklore. But there is one alleged entity that is a bit more grounded in evidence, and it's the story of Philibert Asper. He was a doorkeeper for the Val de Grace hospital, so I'm assuming that kind of means like a security guard or something like that. But anyway, on the 3rd of November 1793, Philibert found his way down into the catacombs. People aren't really sure why he was down there. There was a rumour that he was looking for the liquor that the Chartreux convent monks stored down there, and that he was going to go pinch a bottle for himself. Some people say that he might have been a little bit drunk while he was attempting his little heist, but it wasn't until 11 years later, in 1804, when the body of Philibert was discovered. Apparently, it was just meters from an exit, but if his candle had gone out, which it most likely would have done, it wouldn't have made any difference. He never would have found it. The story goes that the only way that they were able to identify his remains was from the ring of hospital keys that was still attached to his belt. He was buried where he was found on the 30th of April 1804, and a gravestone put up in his memory. The gravestone is actually outside the official catacombs though, so it's in the illegal bit. And so now there have been reports of the ghost of Philibert haunting the catacombs, appearing on the 3rd of November, the day he went missing. But again, I'm being all negative with these stories, but it is what it is. It just says that his ghost has been seen. By who? When? What was he doing? There just doesn't seem to be any details, so it just seems like a convenient little embellishment to add on to make the catacombs seem more creepy. But anyway, there have been plenty more alleged encounters, and these types seem to be a lot more common. There seems to be way more reports of disembodied voices and people seeing shadow figures walk past, like at the end of a corridor around a corner or something. People have also heard wailing and disembodied crying coming from deeper within the catacombs. And it's said that you really don't want to be down there after midnight, as this is a time when the skulls that are piled up on the walls will start to whisper to you, drawing you deeper and deeper into the catacombs. But again, they can't really be serious about it, as in 2015, Airbnb allegedly paid officials €350,000 to hire out the catacombs for a competition, where the prize was for 2 people to stay overnight in a nice comfy bed down in the catacombs. Other people have claimed to feel icy hands on their shoulders, and some have reported hearing a drumming coming from the tunnels. The legend behind this sound is that it is a soldier that got lost in the tunnels and died, and now he can sometimes be heard beating his drum while he tries to find an exit. And all of these stories, they kind of raise alarm bells in the skeptical side of my brain, as they're just a bit too unsubstantiated for me. But for a lot of people, they do make perfect sense. Especially in the time when the remains were first moved underground, a lot of people were convinced that exhuming that amount of bodies was bound to create some restless souls who wouldn't ever be able to find peace again now that they had been disturbed. Which, I mean, yep, disturbing graves, that's a good way to get yourself a ghost. And it did kind of get me thinking, well, if the catacombs are haunted, is it just these souls? Is it something else? Potential murder victims like the widow and her child? Or maybe even people who were never down in the catacombs in the first place? Because while the Mine Inspection Service are constantly monitoring the entire stretch of tunnels, there was a cave-in as recently as 1961 in the suburb of Clamart. 22 people lost their lives there as a bunch of buildings basically disappeared into the mines overnight. And I don't know, it was just a thought, just more quite traumatic death that might be contributing somewhat. And that's obviously by no means the only one. With the amount of cave-ins that there have been over the years, there's gonna have been more than a few disasters that have happened where people have lost their lives. And most likely, quite a few when the tunnels were still being mined. The tunnels themselves have been in operation since about 1321, so, you know, not beyond the realms of imagination. But to be fair, I really feel like the majority of the reputation that the catacombs have comes more from the notoriety of the place, with maybe a few of the urban legends influencing people's opinions somewhat. There's the legend of lost tourists who either break away from the official group and get lost, or who seek out a more authentic tour of the catacombs and try to find a cataphile who will take them in illegally. Maybe get scammed and left in there. Which, I mean, I can see where this urban legend has come from. Just for the record, the official catacombs visitor bit has strongly denied that anyone has ever been lost on one of their tours, but maybe going the cataphile route, I could see it. Even not long ago, back in 2017, 2 teenagers ended up spending 3 days in the Paris catacombs after they'd got lost. Luckily they were found and only had to get treated for some hypothermia, but that could have easily been a lot worse. And then there was the found footage. They think this footage was shot in the 1990s. I don't think anyone really knows for sure. There are dates as recently as 2009 being thrown about online. But basically, there were a group of cataphiles who were down in the catacombs and they came across this camera. They took it home, booted it up, and found there was footage on it. The footage appears to show the cameraman, who looks to be all on his own, running in quite a panicked way through the catacombs. Eventually, he drops the camera and you can just hear his footsteps running away, and the camera carries on rolling until the battery runs out. But what makes this story, I guess, extra creepy is that they never found who this camera belonged to. And so I think by extension of that, part of the story grew to be that this alleged explorer who got lost was never seen again, kind of alluding to the thinking that maybe he died in the catacombs. The cataphiles gave this footage to a filmmaker, Francis Friedland, and I think the first time it was made public was on a TV show, Scariest Places on Earth, in 2000. They showed the footage, which, yep, very creepy, but they also took Francis down into the catacombs and they actually found the area where this footage had been filmed. Like, they could match up the features so they knew they were in the right place. And it was deep in the catacombs. You can tell how deep it was because there wasn't any graffiti on the walls anymore. Like, no one ventures in that deep. But they never found a body, never found any clues as to who the cameraman was, nothing. And so for a lot of people, they do believe that this person did die in the catacombs and has just never been found. And then for others, again, there are just things that don't add up. Why would the cameraman drop his only source of light? And then why would the cataphiles give the footage to a filmmaker and not police? I get maybe they wanted to stay secretive or whatever, but I don't know. Either way, true or totally made up, it definitely adds to the legend of the catacombs. And people are still talking about it now. It's mentioned in all of the YouTube videos and the podcasts about the catacombs. And maybe it was even the inspiration behind the film As Above, So Below, which has got to be said, is one of my favourite horror films. I saw that in the cinema and it was just so creepy. I loved it. With the car burning out and then the feet sticking. Oh, yeah, creepy. Side note, this movie was actually filmed performed in the catacombs with permission from the French authorities, just to add to the creep factor a bit. But one story that most definitely did happen is that in 2004, the French police, while they were there on a training exercise in an area of the catacombs that wasn't really well mapped out, they found something very weird. They initially came across a sign that said building site, no access, which, yeah, might have deterred the average explorer who was just snooping about, but the police knew that this sign most definitely didn't belong, and it was just getting their spidey senses a tingling, you know? So they carried on past the sign when a recording of dogs barking was triggered by motion sensors. Okay, someone has gone to a lot of effort to try and stop people from stumbling across whatever it is that's back here. And what was it? A cinema. A full functioning 500 square meter cinema with all the projecting and sound equipment you'd need. The seating had been carved out of the limestone rock, and there was even a little bar area with like spirits and things. In the room next to the cinema, there was a little informal restaurant area with tables and chairs. Like a whole entire proper setup, all plugged in with electricity and whatnot. They estimated that it must have been set up and in operation for years at that point. And it wasn't even like a seedy thing either. The film canisters that they found were for 1950s noir films and even some more recent thriller movies. Nothing that was banned or even offensive. So the police were a bit stunned by what they found, to say the least. They left but came back 3 days later with people from the electricity board to see if they could figure out how it was all wired up. But when they got back down there, absolutely everything had been stripped out. And there was just a note on the floor saying, "Do not try to find us." And that's just one recorded example of all the illegal gatherings that go on down there. Zach Bagans, when he was down in the catacombs filming for the Ghost Adventures spin-off show NetherWorld, they came across a group of people drinking near Philibert S. Bear's grave. So obviously in the forbidden area. And they put this guy in front of the camera and he was saying, "Oh yeah, one time I came across blood in the catacombs." And when I saw that, I was a bit like, maybe there are still unrecorded deaths going on. Maybe he's about to get onto there being ghosts down there or something. But there was nothing like that. And then I was on Reddit and someone had commented saying that they'd actually met that guy, and the guy admitted to making the story up and being the one to steal their camera, because there was a camera stolen which I think freaked Zach out more than anything. And that's not to say that deaths don't still occur down there. In 2016, there was a 45-year-old man who died of a heart attack after he and a few mates had been drinking and taking drugs at a little party that they were having down in the catacombs. So it does happen, but it just might not be the potential evil place that YouTube demon hunters claim that it is. So even with the remains of 6 million people being laid to rest in the winding tunnels underneath the city, almost all of which were unceremoniously disturbed from what should have been their eternal place of rest, the alleged ghost stories surrounding the Paris catacombs now can't help but leave you wondering, is it really as haunted as it's made out to be? And I would be really interested to know your thoughts on this one. Growing up, the Paris catacombs were just one of those places, always in the top lists, most haunted places in the world, gotta be. Look at what they've done with all those bones, there's no way they're not tripping over ghosts down there. But as I started to look into this story, I kind of changed my mind. Number one, there was a lot of myth and misinformation out there around the catacombs. And then number two, just the stories themselves. None of them were particularly substantiated. Other than the story of Philibert, none of them had any historical grounding. And then even Philibert himself, there weren't any specific accounts from a particular witness claiming to see his actual ghosts or anything like that. So I don't know, these stories just seem a bit too wishy-washy for me. Of course, I might be entirely wrong, and if you've had an experience down there that you just couldn't explain, please do let me know in the comments. I would absolutely love to hear it. But as it stands now, I just feel like maybe when you're down there, surrounded by all of this death, you're underground, it's dark. Oh, and there are 6 million skeletons within a 2-mile radius of where you are right now. Surely that's going to have some sort of subconscious influence, especially if you lean more on the believer side maybe, and you're more open to the possibility of a quote-unquote paranormal encounter. And that may have something to do with people seeing shadows in the corner of their eyes, or the intense feeling of being watched. Or you hear an echo from another tour group and believe you just heard ghostly footsteps, you know what I mean? Because I really struggle to find any account of anyone who wasn't being interviewed for a TV show, or even someone who had commented about an experience that they'd had, like anywhere online. But haunted or not, I think it's one of those places where you should be way more afraid of the living. Because in the famous words of Juno, your caseworker, never trust the living. But let me know your thoughts. Haunted, or just a lot of urban legend and a notorious reputation? Tell me all of the things. And if you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps me out so much. But anyway, that is all from me today. me. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. I love it. I just love sitting down here and chatting ghosts with you. Could do it all day. But until next time, sleep safe. These French names, I'm really sorry if I'm butchering them. It's been so long since I did my GCSE French. I'm trying my hardest, but English is ugly language. Does anyone remember that from Ghosts? I have an ugly English accent, I'm afraid.